What's my greatest weakness? Well, I've done a couple different self-assessments, and so I've identified some of the sort of stuff that I'm not good at. I know one of them is I'm the kind that's not, or that doesn't find a lot of importance, or I don't want to say importance, but I don't remember things like people's birthdays or anniversaries or holidays. If it wasn't for the fact that some of the holidays have the actual date of the holiday, like the 4th of July or Cinco de Mayo, I'd probably forget them. Lots of times my birthday sneaks up on me. So I'm just not that focused on those things. But I know some people are. So for some people, anniversaries, birthdays, those sort of things are very important to them. And so I know that's a weakness of mine. Now, I've also taken the Strength Finders assessment, and so I know that one of my strengths is organizational skills. And so what I've done to mitigate not remembering people's birthdays and things like that is usually one of two things. The greatest thing is if I can find somebody that those things are important to, that works in the organization, and I can put them in charge of, reminding me. It's like, hey, it's so-and-so's birthday, we should get a cake or something like that, right? But absence that, what I do is I use Outlook reminders. I have an Outlook reminder for people's birthdays, for my mom's birthday, for my anniversary, and I'll put a reminder 2 weeks out ahead of my mom's birthday saying, hey, go buy your mom a birthday card, so that way I remember. And I found that keeps me pretty organized, helps me remember stuff, and then when I am able to remember those things like the birthdays and anniversaries or whatever other significant events that my employees might have, they don't know that I had an Outlook reminder or how I remembered it, but it engages them and makes them feel as though I care about them, which I do. I just am not very good at remembering things like birthdays and stuff. So again, that's probably my biggest weakness, and that's how I've kind of adapted to overcome it, is to use my organizational skills to set reminders and pay attention, track those things that way. And that concludes my answer. That was probably a little short, maybe
2:13.
2:13 left. So
okay.
Yeah, it was like
you
3.
Had to set it 5.
Yeah,
okay.
I had it set at 5 counting down. So
Cancel.
So 3:50. Yeah, that'll work.
I came over here
So
so you didn't have to keep turning it in. Whoever's on there.
No, that's fine. So and again, this is Stu's opinion. Okay, is when they ask that greatest weakness question, it always used to drive me nuts, and I know it's one of the least favorite questions of a lot of people. And it's like, why should I tell you or give you a reason not to hire me, right? It's like, what a stupid question to ask, right? And plus, a lot of times people would give you one answer, and a month later they'd give you something else because that's what's on their mind. So it was always like, what's the purpose of that question?
Right.
Well, and I used to always give every time I'd interview, I'd give a different answer for it, and I came up with some great answers. Like I would say that what I thought were great answers. I would tell people, well, I have different. I don't have strengths, or I don't think I have strengths or weaknesses. I have different characteristics, and in some situations there are weakness, and in some situations there are strength. For instance, I'm a little anal retentive, which means that I'm very good at organizing things and keeping track, and I want everything in a spreadsheet and be able to organize it alphabetically or by date, chronologically. That serves me well when it comes to managing files and data and those sort of things. But it can be a disadvantage if I have to do something quickly or I have a high volume of things. I get bogged down in the details and making sure every little thing is perfect, and then I don't get everything that I'm supposed to accomplish because I should be not so anal about getting everything just right and organized and alphabetized in chronological order. So again, I don't think I have a strength or weaknesses. Those are just characteristics, and it depends on the situation as to whether or not it's a strength or a weakness. I thought that was an awesome answer. Okay, and I had people tell me it was a really good answer, but it wasn't what we were looking for, right?
Oh.
So I didn't score well on it, even though I thought it was a great answer. The board members thought, oh, that was a pretty good answer, but it didn't score well. Okay, so the point of the interview is not to just give a great answer, but it's to give the answer that they're looking for and score well. Okay, so I've got the same sheet I handed out for you guys to use to make notes. I've got that kind of as an answer sheet that I was going to give after we watched Mac's interview and my interview. So I consider there to be 4 main components of that answer that make it correct. The first one is I've done a self-assessment. Okay, tell them which one. Briggs Meyer, Strength Finder. This is a Strength Finder's book. If one of you guys want to borrow it or something,
How many
you're
have
more
we
welcome
been
to.
through?
Yeah.
They used to have classes here.
Yeah,
A lot of classes.
I'm a big fan of 4 lenses training. But whatever the self-assessment is, there's 360 self-assessments where you evaluate yourself and other people evaluate you and all that sort of stuff. So tell them, yes, I've done some assessments, and if you can, mention which ones. If not, at least say, I've done a self-assessment. Okay. The second part of that is to identify what your weakness is, whatever that may be. Okay. Obviously, saying that I'm a serial killer is too far. You want to pick a weakness that isn't a job killer for the interview. But again, pick something that's real and something that the panel members would understand as, okay, oh yeah, I see where that could be a weakness, right? And it doesn't hurt to explain why you feel it's a weakness. Like for me, I don't remember birthdays, and then people are mad because I didn't remember their birthday, right, or anniversary. I actually did an interview, and all 3 of the panel members were all female. And when I answered that question, this is one of the questions they asked me. When I answered the question, I said, I forget my wife's anniversary, and I just went on and on and on. At the end of it, they said, we noticed you said you forget your wife's anniversary. Isn't it your anniversary too? And I said, that's why it's a weakness. I mean,
Well, it could have been wife's anniversary or something else.
Yeah, I just made it as, see, that's proof that that's one of my weaknesses, because that's the way I think.
You're right.
So again, identify your weakness, step 2. The next step is to say what you've done to mitigate the weakness. So in my example, I said I use my organizational skills, and this is one where I tell you, don't try to. These notes down here. One of them says, don't try to sell your weakness as a strength.
Right.
Okay. But what you can do, okay, is say how you utilize one of your strengths to mitigate your weakness. Okay. So it's a good opportunity to kind of weave in a strength while you're talking about a weakness. Okay. So in my case, I said I got good organizational skills because I, again, mentioned the self-assessment I took that indicated that was a strength and how I use it. Okay. The fourth part of that is to say what's the result of the mitigation. Okay. So was your mitigation successful or not? Right. For me, I say, okay, so now I'm able to keep track and people are happier. Right. That's the result of my mitigation. I know one guy I talked to, his weakness was he was not a morning person. So he makes a point of getting up and exercising first thing in the morning, which gets his blood pumping, wakes him up, and now he's more efficient and effective first thing in the morning than just walking around the office all groggy with a coffee cup going, oh man, I don't want to read that report, right? So that was his example of how his mitigation of working out first thing in the morning mitigated, and that mitigation, what the result of that mitigation was now he's more productive in the morning. Okay, so that's the fourth step, So the 4 steps are: you've done a self-assessment, you come up with a way to what your weakness is, or you've identified what your weakness is. Number 3 is you've come up with some way to mitigate that weakness, and then number 4 is what's the impact of that mitigation? Did it work? Okay. Now I included 5 and 6 on there. Some people may want to at that point talk about if they've reassessed it. Okay, so in other words, like the guy that works out in the morning, he may say, and so after 6 months, I kind of reassessed how that was working for me. I've noticed that I'm not behind. My inbox is decreased, and I think that's because I'm more productive first thing in the morning and throughout the day. And so I've determined that my mitigation has worked. So you can talk about reassessing. That's a good thing, okay? Because again, it shows you've done that process, right? The other thing it shows is that you're concerned and taking active participation in improving your skills, okay? Because that's really what the basic of this question is that they don't want to know about your weakness. They want to know, how do you deal with self-improvement and continually growing as a leader? That's the real question, okay? But it's hidden and couched in what's your greatest weakness, okay? So if you kind of remember that when they say what's your greatest weakness, the real question is, how do you continually improve and grow as a leader? You'll probably nail the question, okay? So the other option number 6 is you might think about ending on a humorous note, especially if it's something that is topical and that all the panel members might get, right? So let's say it's been raining for the last week and you're doing an interview, you might say something, and my other weakness is getting used to this rain or something, kind of end on, again, it just kind of maybe a personality thing that some people might like to do that. So again, I list it kind of as an optional thing there. Because, and the reason I put that on there is it never hurts to endear yourself to the panel members, and so if you can make them grin or something like that accomplishes that, right? It makes them go, oh, she's nice, I like her, she made me laugh, right? So you might want to think about that just to kind of wrap up your story. I also talk about some things to avoid. One of the things that most panel members hate is when somebody say, well, I don't really have any weaknesses. Again, that's not the purpose of this question. They're not really trying to find out your weakness, they're trying to find out your process for improvement, right? So if you say you don't really have any weaknesses, they're going to go, yeah, they don't know the answer to this question and they're not going to give it to me, right? The other thing is, and I mentioned this, was trying to turn your weakness into a strength. Because then it's like you're trying to say, well, there's no reason not to hire me, which again goes back to you probably don't understand what it is they're looking for in the answer, which is, again, I've done a self-assessment, identified a weakness, come up with a mitigation, and here's the result of that mitigation. Okay. So if you say, well, here's my weakness, but it's really a strength, like I did, that I thought was a great answer, but it didn't have those components of self-assessment, mitigation, results. It was just a great answer that didn't fit into the main 4 things of what they were looking for. Okay. The other thing to avoid is using an example that doesn't relate to the skills needed for the position you're applying for. Okay. So if your greatest weakness is you can't go in the house without petting your dog first, and sometimes your dog's muddy, but it's like the panel's going to be like, okay, but how is that going to help you at work, right? So it would seem like it goes without saying to make sure that it's something work related, but some people they kind of like the camera's on, they're sitting in front of the panel, somebody asks them that, and they're not prepared. You haven't thought of it. That's the thing. Think of a weakness beforehand and practice telling that weakness using these steps, these 4 main things that you want to hit, and practice it a few times. So that way you know that if they ask me this question, this is the example weakness that I'm going to talk about. Okay? Don't end up going, oh, I can't think of anything. Oh, I love my dog, and I let him in the house when he's muddy, and I shouldn't do that. That's not the weakness to talk about, right? Saying your weakness really isn't a problem. Okay? Say, well, I have this weakness, but it really doesn't cause me any problems, because again, it's not meeting those 4 components of, you know, I identified, or I self-assessed, I identified, I mitigated, and then here's the result. It's just saying you're trying to make an excuse of how your weakness doesn't cause any problems and they should hire you anyway. But again, they're really not asking about your weakness.
Yeah.
So to say that your weakness doesn't really cause any problems, again, you're missing the format of the question, of the answer. Of course, using an example that uses prohibited information. So, you know, there's certain things that they can't ask, and you probably shouldn't volunteer those things, even though I think legally you can, right? You know, they can't ask about your age, but you could tell them, you know, well, I'm almost 50 now, and for the last 40 years, but most of the time, those prohibited the prohibited questions aren't going to add anything to your story anyway, so I would avoid volunteering that information. And then, of course, avoid controversial political subjects. So you probably don't want to say your greatest weakness is I'm so passionate about my work with the Democratic National or the Republicans or whatever, right?
Or the skinheads.
Or the, yeah, you know, and the same thing might go, you know, if you worked with an anti-abortion thing. Now, you may feel very strongly for one way or the other, but the problem is your panel members might feel very strongly one way or the other also, and they may not all feel the same direction that you go in. Yeah. Okay? So again, just, it's like I tell all my friends, it's like, why would you get on Facebook or any other social media and talk about your political views? Because guess what? Half of your friends are not going to like it. Okay, half of them will, but the other half doesn't. So why would you want to alienate half of your friends? Because you know it's split, right? So same thing during an interview. Don't potentially alienate half of the panel members by bringing something up that's polarizing. Okay. So again, kind of a no-brainer, but I figured I'd throw it in there just so people kind of remember not to do that. So the other thing is, the last comment there is, remember, you're still using all this time to sell yourself. Even though it's a weakness question, okay, you're going to talk about how you have organizational skills, okay, how you have acumen to identify issues and the organizational skills to overcome them, okay, which is very important for a managerial position, right? So you want to take up as much of that time as possible, or as much time as it takes to tell that story as best you can, you know, in the time that you got. Now, you know, I went 3 minutes or something on this question. I might go 6 on another answer, and so usually on a 30-minute interview, I'll finish plus or minus 30 seconds either way. Although sometimes, if you know, normally there's a clock there that you can see. I have ended up where it's like, okay, we're the last question, I've got like a minute and a half. Oh, wow. You know, and so, you know, you can end up shortening yourself some time. But again, you don't want your answer to be too short, because you want to take that opportunity to weave in as many telling things about yourself, you know, and talk, you know, you can talk about the outcome or even tell a story, okay? You can tell a story about, yeah, I used to always forget it was Secretary's Day, and then I started using an Outlook reminder, and the secretary we had was a very touchy-feely, you know, really person, right? And she used to get really upset that I would forget it was Secretary's Day, and so I put it on the Outlook calendar, and I put it on there a couple days ahead of time that, you know, hey, it's Monday, Thursday's Secretary's Day, so that gave me enough time to go out and get cake with her name on it, or some cupcakes, or a card, or something. And when I gave it to her, she was so excited that I remembered it, and it really made her day. They tell you during the interviews, tell stories, because people will remember the stories. They'll remember, that's Stu guy. That was the guy that bought the cupcakes for his secretary, and she was really happy, right?
At the Chippendale.
It's because a lot of the panels, they'll pick something out like that, and then when they're racking and stacking, a lot of times that's how they'll refer to you. They'll say, who was that guy that did the cupcake things for his secretary? Seriously, right? I mean, you forget the names, but you remember the stories. Okay, so if it doesn't hurt to weave in a little story or something on that, it increases your time. It makes it memorable. And again, if you're covering those 4 other sort of things, it's kind of just like icing on the cake, or cupcakes in this case. They can add to it. So remember, try to get your answer up there to where it's not long for being long's sake, for time's sake, but it's long enough to be able to answer this question, which again is really how do you self-evaluate yourself and make yourself better, right?
Yep.
I think that concludes my answer.